Hi, this is Dante Bosco, and you're listening to Mouthful of Toast podcast.
Hey Toasters, welcome to the extra slice of Mouthful of Toast. My name is Tim, and I'm here with my co-toast host, Ian.
Hello, hello.
And also, we have a special guest for this episode, a friend of the show named Lindsey.
Hello.
They'll be joining us over Skype, and Lindsey is actually joining us from Japan to talk about a special topic for this little bonus episode. Welcome to the show, Lindsey. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tim. I was really excited. I've been excited for a bit.
We don't have any party favors right now, but just imagine that we have them for you.
A fruit basket's in the mail.
Yeah. Edible arrangements.
It's something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You don't know what I would give to have that much fruit for free.
All right, so Lindsey, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself for the listener's sake? Because I've been friends with you for a while, and you've been in Japan for quite a while now. So could you talk just a bit about what got you into traveling and why you're there and all that?
Yeah, sure. So to start with, most of your listeners, if they know me at all on the internet, will probably know me as Gryfeathr Photography, which is also impossible to spell. So that's Gryfeathr Photography. I do cosplay photography with a bunch of people on the East Coast of the U.S. when I'm in the U.S. Other than that, my actual academic background is with Ursinus College, and I was an East Asian Studies major when I was in college. And I was a Japanese minor at the time. I've always had a long-term interest in Japanese language and everything else because a really close friend of mine made me watch anime at one point, and then there was no turning back after that, which was incidentally Samurai Troopers or Ronin Warriors as we know it here. So that's fantastic. The reason I'm in Japan now, I've been here since March of 2014. I'm one of the many people here who acts as an assistant teacher of English with one of the dispatch companies. So basically my day-to-day is I go to Japanese schools or public schools here and support the English teachers in teaching English. So that gives me a lot of extra time to go running around doing other things like running down to Tokyo, which is where I don't live, and taking a look at what's going on down there, following events and other things I like and enjoy. So in that way, I get to be sort of eyes on the ground as a foreign lady in Japan.
This is something we thought would be really important to have perspective as someone in Japan to discuss anime and convention culture and all that, because we can only provide so much on the East Coast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Not a problem at all. I am more excited than I should be, probably.
Well, you're definitely first in line to become our very first Japan correspondent. So, put that on a business card. Yeah.
We'll be sending you 400 of those as well with the fruit basket.
Please, I need them. Yes. These are all things I actually need. Don't joke.
Oh, man. So you mentioned already that Ronin Warriors was one of your first series that you watched.
Yeah.
And of course, since we've got you on our Mouthful of Toast podcast, I'm sure that the fans are wondering what your connection with anime has been since then. How much anime do you watch? What are your favorite series? Just feel free to let us know what your tastes are.
Well, my tastes are pretty varied, but the genres that I read range from things like Tokyo Ghoul right now, which is pretty like, oh, there's some guts going across the screen now, to things like Saiyuki, which is an older series too, which is like more run and gun, and then like Slayers is another big one. I might as well go chronologically. So Ronin Warriors was my intro drug to anime off of Sci-Fi late at night, if anyone else remembers it. And then
Oh,
the
God,
Slayers
yes.
for me, which is like a big high adventure thing in the 90s. So now I'm old. And Sayuki was really popular after that. So I tend to like really old series, sort of the classics from the 90s era, because that's when I was first watching things.
Oh yeah.
But recently, it's been really Tiger and Bunny for me.
Oh, I know you're a
Okay.
big Tiger Bunny fan. I've also
Yeah,
watched
it's
that
a big
series,
deal
and
for
it's
me.
it was a real treat, I think. And I didn't know it was still doing stuff over there. There's movies and promotional like games and all that. I had no idea that the franchise is still
I didn't know
running.
that.
Yeah. So,
Well, it's in the death throes of a series being sort of bookended by the parent company right now for various Sunrise-related reasons that are slightly dramatic in the industry.
whoa, that's a story for another
Tiger
podcast.
and Bunny, just to
That sounds really
briefly
interesting.
go on a complete tangent, Tiger and Bunny is the project that never should have existed.
Oh, wait,
Yeah.
that's it. Wow.
If
Oh.
if you're familiar with Tiger and Bunny, you know that a big part of the plot is focusing on how each company are sponsors of different heroes, and that's how they make their business. And the logos in this show are real companies who actually paid the money to be placed in the show.
Yeah.
That's part of how they funded it and funded their advertisement because Sunrise wasn't supporting them.
Oh.
Oh, I didn't realize that it was that contentious. Wow. Okay.
So
So Sunrise basically did its best to help them as little as possible, and the people loved the show so much, the people who work on it, that they basically worked their asses off to prove them wrong.
excellent. Well, I think it had pretty good success. I enjoyed it myself, and I'm glad you're keeping up with newer series too. And I know you're also a big One Piece fan, but we're definitely not getting to that because that's just going to be a whole
Then
to
we'll
do.
just have an entire episode of One Piece, and
I
Ian
feel like
will
I'd have to
be sitting
recuse myself for
there,
that
happy
one.
about his life.
Well, One Piece, I guess. Is a thing.
It is certainly a thing, and One Piece in Japan is a whole to do. But I won't even try to get in that right now. Also, I wanted to mention, I didn't mention earlier, Carrie isn't joining us for this episode. She had to work tonight. But when you mentioned Slayer, she immediately came to mind, and I'm sure she's going to listen to this and be like, "Oh, I want to talk about the classics with you." But yeah.
Well, you should.
Yeah, she'll definitely hit you up later. We'll definitely try to get some more talking with her later. But sadly, not joining us for this recording. For the listeners who are curious about that. So let's get right into one of the big subjects that I wanted Lindsey on the show about specifically was Comiket, one of the biggest conventions out there in Japan, possibly the biggest. And it's how this... What can you just tell us, like, okay, what is a Comiket, and like how floored with you when you walked into this giant convention? Like, what can you tell our listeners about it?
All right, so the first thing to know is that convention is actually the wrong word to use.
Oh, no.
Crap.
We have to restart the episode, Tim.
Geez.
Oh, God. Oh, jeez. Oh, God.
Burn it all down. I'm done.
And this comes back to part of the difference over here in how fandom expresses itself. So to give you a textbook definition of Comiket, Comiket is short for comic market. They love to shorten things over here when there are complicated Western words going on. And it really is a market. It's basically the largest volunteer-run, nonprofit-run event focused on anime and manga in some way or fashion in Japan, except for the Tokyo Car Show.
Huh.
That's the only event that's bigger than it that's a nonprofit event that is more widely attended.
Okay.
And Comiket is focused on the creators of dojinshi and similar goods or self-made works. And
for our listeners, wait, hold on. You mentioned dojinshi. Tim and I know what that is, but we just want to make sure that, I guess, let's get everything basic just explained out for everyone. So what is dojinshi?
Dojinshi over here has a wider definition than used in the American fandom. In the American fandom, when you say dojinshi, what comes to mind are fan-made comic parodies of other series, often porn, that allow the author or artist to explore things about the series, much like fan fiction over in the United States.
Okay.
If you think about what you see in Artist Alley at Otakon or similar conventions, if you've been to them, it's very much like that product, only very different at the same time. But in Japan, dojinshi refers to any amateur work created by a person based on a specific theme, including parody of anime and manga. So when you say dojinshi over here, that can include self-made games of completely original works. It can include dojinshi about your favorite pairing from Sayuki. It could mean the fan fiction that's been collected into one volume, or it could mean various amounts of goods like jewelry or other things made by a fan and then sold to another fan. So Comiket is a venue for all of these things to be sold, including original works, although original works is a much smaller part of it than the rest of the things I just listed these days.
Okay, so does it feel like when you walk in, it's like a giant artist alley at first, or is there press events happening? Is there actual anime companies coming to this and giving press releases and official merchandise, or is this solely for the fans, by the fans, what they do?
Basically, it's a combination of all the things you listed. But the main focus is on the fan-created works in the marketplace. So to give you an idea of the scale, which will help you imagine what I'm talking about, Comiket currently takes place in Tokyo Big Sight. That's spelled SIGHT because they're being cute about it. And it's a gigantic entertainment center or expo center near Odaiba, which is where the giant Gundam is, if people have heard of that. And it is essentially, if you've been to Otakon and the whole convention center of Otakon, multiply that by 3.
Whoa.
Phew. Yeah.
And the entire place is people selling dojinshi.
Oh my god.
Man. That is insane.
Except for one dealer's hall, the entire dealer's hall worth of industry booths.
Okay.
So when you walk in to the main entrance of Tokyo Big Sight, which looks kind of like 3 giant pyramids are about to fall on your head because they're inverted. You have 2 halls you can go into. There's the West Hall and the East Hall. And the East Hall is like 1 Otacon's worth of space. And the West Hall is 1 Otacon's worth of space. And then the West Hall has a 2nd floor.
Well.
And the East Hall and the West Hall have sub-halls. And each one of these is packed with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of individuals or circles selling their wares to over, I think, 140,000 people coming in and out the doors.
Wow.
It's the biggest AA you have ever seen.
How many years have you gone? And do you know how many years Comiket has been running for off the top of your head?
I do know the second one. For the first question, this was actually my first time ever making it to Comiket. My school schedule last year didn't allow for it, and I haven't been in Japan for a long time since I was here in Japan as a college student, which I forgot to mention, to study language. I'm back now, so there's been a gap of about 6 or 7 years between I was last here and now. And during that duration, I haven't been here at all. I've never been to Comiket before. But Comiket has been running since the 70s. And it was initially, according to the official history, there was another event that in description seems to resemble more closely the convention atmosphere that we're used to in the States. And there was a disagreement between a major dojinshi circle and the runners, because the runners were denying participative access to their group, or in some other circles too. To explain what I mean by circle, in Japan you have groups of people who gather together to create their original works. Imagine it sort of like how Clamp works, Clamp is a group of 4 women who work together to make all of their series. Different people draw different art and write the story depending on what's going on.
Right.
A circle works in just the same way, though they may have 20 members or only 1 or 3. So when you say circle, you're talking about like a unit of creators that associate together. So, basically, the circles were like, the hell with this. We're making our own if you're not going to let us in. And that's how Comiket was born. And so Comiket's bylaws still heavily emphasize that everyone is a participant. If you're a buyer, if you're a seller, if you're part of the industry, we call you all the same word, a participant. And we will never turn anyone away. And the only reason we'd ever turn you away is because we don't have space and we have an entirely egalitarian, free, like, a lottery system for doing that choice. So we're never going to say, for some reason, you can't exhibit here unless you grossly break a rule or something to that extent.
Interesting.
So that attitude really bleeds into the feeling of Comiket, because in the creator-run space, which is most of it, everyone is at the exact same types of tables in the exact same types of rows, no matter whether you sell thousands of dojinshi or only hundreds or only 20.
Wow, that's really okay, that's really cool. I think.
Yeah, egalitarian is definitely the right word for it. I can't imagine like that really working for, well, American culture ever, for instance.
Right.
You just hear about artists complaining about small tables and stuff if they're big in the scenes.
A lot of times they'll move to the dealer's room. A lot of times, like, Otakon will be like, "Oh, you made too big of a line. There was traffic. Whatever. You're going to the dealer's room," and which costs way more for the artist.
Different strata of stuff. Yeah.
Granted, Comiket isn't cheap. Every person who exhibits has to spend about $75 to be an artist there.
Oh wow. Okay. So you've been going to Western conventions for a long time, though, right?
Oh, yes.
What are some of your favorites?
Very long time. My first convention was a small local one in New Jersey, which is where I'm from. And it was called ShoujoCon, and it ran for a few years, and it was really small and friendly, and it was a really good beginner con. If you guys have talked to people about try to go to a small con first, because it lets you get used to the culture of it before you're stuck in the middle of Otakon and
Yeah.
And then I started going to Otakon. It was basically what would happen is I'd go to my mother and go, I don't want any birthday presents. Can my birthday present be the funds to go to Otakon? Bless my mother's heart. She would take her 13-year-old daughter and her friends. She would drive us to Baltimore.
Oh, boy.
And she would basically be the adult in charge. And she checks out the used books around the area while we're inside. And then she would make sure we ate. So I've been going to conventions since I was like 13. And I'm 27 now, so 14 years altogether of going to at least one convention every year.
Wow. Now,
so I've never missed an Otakon until this year. So I think I've been to 12 Otakons in a row.
Well, Comiket doesn't sound like that bad of a replacement for it. Different, but not bad of a replacement.
In a way it is, in a way it isn't. Because Otakon, by the nature of how it's set up, and in a lot of ways, it's in the cultural differences here too. Like, the thing to explain is that in Japan, the American convention format doesn't actually exist. You have a strong separation between things that are created and run by volunteers who are fans, and things that are created and run by the industry. Partially because the industry is actually like here in Japan and has a vested interest in making big events to promote themselves because they can afford to without shipping everyone over to California or something.
Yeah.
So you have large industry events which may have guests like voice actors or other people, but it's all really focused on promoting what's going on with their current shows or future shows, just like any kind of trade show. And so you don't have the same sort of everyone together feeling that you have at an event like Otakon, which is completely fan run, for fans, by fans, I think is one of their bylines. But the fan run events here usually take the form, and I speak very generally because even I don't have that deep of an experience of the fandom here because it's hard to find as someone who isn't a complete native speaker and all that.
Oh, you don't
But
go to
here, if you
Akihabara
have
or?
trust me, I've been there. My wallet hurts and cries. But basically, for the fan run volunteer events where you have that energy of this was made and put together by people passionate by this thing and who want to share this thing with others, it usually takes the form of something like Comiket, where it's fans who create material selling to fans who consume the material. And within that space, you have a sort of exchange of the fan to fan experience. And then you have an addition at the fan run events, much more than the industry events. You have venues for cosplayers to be present and to be mingling and things like that.
Oh yeah, you did mention this to me. I wanted your thoughts on how cosplayers are handled at Comiket compared to regular conventions. Sorry, not regular Western conventions. They're different. Sorry.
I'm so proud of you, Tim. You've been listening.
We're learning slowly.
You told us, you told me that Comiket had you go to particular areas designated for cosplayers. Now, what's that about?
So basically, the way cosplay is handled in public venues is very different here than in the States. I keep referring to Otakon because it's the one I know the best, and it's a good example of your average Western convention.
Sure.
At Otakon, the cosplayer comes to the convention. We stay at hotels nearby. We change in the hotels, usually extravagantly, and then walk from the hotel to the venue. And basically downtown Baltimore, for those who don't know, becomes a washing sea of primary colors, glitter, occasionally gray trolls, and large wings walking everywhere. People go get food in costume. People are present outside in costume. People go and take photographs all over the venue. And it's very much something you see as you walk around, and it's part of what's going on, but it sometimes can cause issues because sometimes you're somewhere you're not supposed to be. Or you're blocking traffic because that person's so cool, but you just asked them to take a picture in the middle of the most crowded hallway in Otakon.
Right. Happens all the time.
So at events in Japan, the approach is extremely different. And this is pretty much the same procedure across every event I've ever been to, including the industry events that allow cosplay. Now, notice I said allow cosplay. In Japan, this is how it works. The cosplayer, not dressed, takes themselves and their costume to the venue. At the venue, they provide space to change. While in the venue, you change into your costume, including whatever else errata that you must put on or need to do in a shared space separated by the traditional two genders, which may or may not be a great idea considering how people aren't binary for real. But for the case of argument here, we have girl side and boy side.
Okay.
And the cosplayer dresses, and the cosplayers pay a fee to be able to access this area. So to cosplay at a convention in Japan, you have to pay like your exhibit.
Wow. So like if you don't pay, you're not dressing up.
Yeah. And then you leave once you're all dossied up, you can go wherever you want within the venue. But if you want to take pictures or have pictures taken of you, there are designated cosplay photography areas, mostly aimed at preventing severe congestion in hallways and other issues like that. And at Comiket, this year at least, both of these areas were outside in the full sun with no shade.
Ooh.
Oh, jeez.
Yikes.
And some people were in some really impressive costumes, like Monster Hunter armor, and they're just toughing it out. It was upwards of 90 degrees most of that day, the day I'm talking about particularly. And you go there, and that's where the photographers are, and that's where the photographers find you.
Okay.
And you ask the cosplayer for a picture, just like you're kind of used to. You take the picture, and you might exchange information to do private shoots later as in like in other situations or at specialty areas, but you don't do the like photo shoot at the con thing.
Yeah.
I have a question actually. Does that end up leading to, I would say, a ratio of fewer cosplayers compared to the total attendance? Does that mean that cosplayers tend to be people who put in more work on average in their costumes than you would see over here? Things like that.
Actually, I've been in the cosplay scene for quite a long time. Most of my friends are cosplayers. I'm a cosplay photographer. So when I walk around, in the back of my head, I'm going, how do we stack up? Basically.
Yeah.
And you know what? The level of skill is the same across the board. You have people who are on the lower end of the level where they are really passionate, but they might be new to sewing or new to what's going on. And they're really enthusiastic, you know, a beginner cosplayer.
Right.
And they look exactly like the really passionate beginner cosplayers we have in the States. And then you have like the people who made an entire armor set from Dragon Monster Hunter and they look fantastic, like unreal. And then you have the joke costumes, just like we do in the States, where there's some sort of in-joke from a game or from an internet meme or whatever.
That's
So
funny because
you don't really see that kind of difference.
like I imagine getting into like I've done like joke costumes before. I imagine getting a joke costume, but then like having to pay and then like sit in the
Yeah,
like,
that's
I'm in the cosplay zone with like a bunch of serious cosplayers sitting there like I just wanted to meme on people like what's going on.
and the cosplay zone sounds like a really bad sci-fi.
I feel like I've been stuck there sometimes before cons, but
Your hair is
geez.
always slightly a strange color, and your background glistens when you're particularly upset.
lots of sparkles. But it seems, I feel like that would dissuade a lot of people from joke costumes a lot. And I guess people who are doing joke costumes are either ones who put a lot of work into it or are just so enthusiastic about it being photographed that they're just doing it anyway. So
I guess
Don't
is it
really
fair
see-
to?
Oh, go ahead.
I guess. Oh yeah. All right. I guess I'm just wondering: is it fair to say that the barrier to entry to do cosplay over there is just part of that fan culture now? That's just something that is done, and then you just do cosplay, no matter what. That isn't really a barrier as much as it is just part of that convention culture now.
Well, think of it this way. Comiket is free to walk into. You don't have to pay for it as an attendee.
I'm sorry, did you say free?
But you do have to just walk in.
Tim, we're going to Japan.
On the way.
So many events are either free to walk in, or here's the trick: you have to pay for the giant magazine that tells you where everyone is.
Oh, that's how they get you.
Ooh.
But that entry fee is only about $20.
Mhm.
So if you think about it, the average attendee to an American convention, where you're basically signing up to be a member of the convention group, which is what your fees are, folks. You're saying I'm a member of the Otakon convention, blah blah blah. It's your membership.
You signed the contract. You're gonna be a magical girl. Yep.
Yeah, basically. It says it somewhere when you're buying it. It says buy a membership. It always says buy a membership.
Right.
So that's how it works legally. But that money that you put up front isn't being put up front here. So when you're being asked to give money as a seller or a cosplayer, it's really not that different from the participation fee in general that we pay over here.
Okay.
That's cool. I would prefer that system in the West, to be honest. But
But you have to have a venue and that can handle uncontrollable numbers.
right, Baltimore's not
Right.
the place for that.
Right.
Also,
Yeah, it's not.
Otakon is gated. Well, nowadays the general number of attendance is so high, it doesn't really seem to make much effect on the type of people who walk
Yeah.
in. When I was first going, it made it feel like an extremely safe space because everyone who was there was someone who had paid to be there, who really wanted to be there, and the numbers were low enough that as numbers decrease, your sense of community sort of increases. So people really looked out for each other, at least in my experiences. And you felt extremely safe. Comiket, I'm not saying I didn't feel safe. I'm also in Japan, which is an extremely safe country to be in. period.
Hmm.
But you also, anyone could walk in, though most people who didn't have an interest in what was going on wouldn't walk in.
Okay.
So the numbers can swell unpredictably for Comiket, though they do like chart them. But can you imagine if Otakon was free?
Ooh.
Oof,
I just got a
jeez,
cold shudder down my spine. That was. Oh.
Exactly. So there is some difference there in the perspective because what they're trying to accomplish is different.
Yeah, definitely.
The big industry events might have an entry fee, but they're usually not that extreme.
Okay. Well,
It's more like when you go to to a car show or some other kind of level of event, that kind of level of fee.
sure. Well, I think that's most of our questions about Comiket right now. I think some of our listeners actually had some questions for you.
Exciting.
Yes. Cody writes in, are the same series popular over there that are popular over here in the West?
Let's put it this way. Yes, and then no.
Explain,
Basically,
Lindsay.
in a general way, the top of the top, like countrywide, you see it everywhere. You see the ads everywhere. Anime over here is usually the ones that are popular in the West or just about to become popular.
Okay.
Because they're
Makes
a
sense.
big deal, period.
Right.
But there are genres and series that are very popular over here that just don't show up on the radar in America, speaking specifically of the USA, in the USA fandom because of either access or just hard, like a lot of genres such as girls' romance games or historical based games. There's a very passionate section of people over here who really, really love things about historical figures in Japan and things based on them. There's an entire genre section of Comiket dedicated to them. But in the USA con circuit, there are people who are very passionate about these games and these things, but some of this stuff is based off of novels, which aren't translated very often.
Okay.
And or they're based off of games that are never really brought over, or if they were brought over, may not have been done in a particularly exciting way. And the popularity of the otome genre, which is girls' romance genre, where you're like a blushing girl protagonist and there's all these pretty men around you want to date. There's a small fandom in the USA, but it's obviously a large part of the subgenre of anime and manga over here.
Yeah, it's only like a subsection.
Yeah. I've heard that one otome game was brought over just a week ago or something, and it was released on iOS, except they released it with a machine translation.
Oh no!
That's the last thing you want to do in a game where the reason you play it is because of the dialogue, because that's all you're reading for hours.
Oh, Sakura-san, I love you so much.
I think the subtitle that was really passed around was, "No, I don't want to spend time with the suicide bunny."
Oh, goodness gracious.
But apparently it was a really big otome title. They just didn't, I guess, get translators to truly do a true translation of it.
I wouldn't be surprised.
They just threw it through Google language tools and just were like, it's fine this way. Ooh.
Oh yeah.
Oh boy.
Gosh, that's painful.
I have a question about the historical stuff, actually.
Right.
I know that there's, for instance, what we get over here, since, for instance, Rurouni Kenshin was such a huge hit over here because it was, of course, much more accessible, I think, than straight up just dive into the Meiji era politics sort of stuff.
Right.
I know that there's a ton of series, for instance, focusing on the Shinsengumi, that political police squad from that era in Japan, that only a fraction of those make it over here. Are there any other eras of history that really get majorly represented? I guess what I'm asking is also are any of them represented the way that we Americans see World War II as a constant go-to for fiction?
Actually, World War II is a constant go-to for fiction here.
Oh,
strangely enough.
interesting.
Makes sense.
In a sort of AU sense, series that are inspired by the events of, because historically, even now, the effects of the World Wars is extremely strong on the consciousness of Japanese culture for a lot of reasons I will not get into at the moment because you will have a podcast that is 6 hours long. But to disclaimer, I'm not myself a huge history genre fan, so I don't know it very well. But in a casual sense, I do see a lot of things from the Warring States era.
Okay.
Which is just basically what it sounds like. A while ago, a bunch of guys were trying to control a bunch of places and got upset about it at each other a lot. And there's a lot of things based on Chinese historical, like classic historical eras. If you think about it like this, the types of things that in European influenced culture, the times and periods that people look back to and sort of treat as a fantasy setting, such as like the War of the Roses or Victorian era, they do a very similar thing here. They're just pulling from a different section of history.
Right. Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Okay. So when they go for like an old time fantasy thing, it's usually like bizarro European as through the lens of the exports from Europe into here culturally through novels and things like that. Or it's the Edo period. Edo period is really popular. Pre-Meiji era, Warring States era. Like, if you look at a list of historical dramas, those will be the eras that are also popular in anime and manga stuff.
Oh yeah, historical drama like the incredibly accurate Sengoku Basara. That's really accurate. Yeah. Like put your guns on. They said that was the inspiring speech by that commander. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I learned a lot from that show.
All of it's super accurate history, right?
Absolutely. Masamune totally got those 6 swords going all at once every time. He was like a helicopter.
Oh boy.
A one-eyed
helicopter. I'm surprised you didn't say One Piece was historical.
Hey, whoa. I'm not a dunce.
One Piece is historical in one sense. It's historical in terms of manga and anime though.
Yeah, whatever.
All right, let me let you know. For those who are not aware of what One Piece is over here, this is an experience I related to Tim that will give you an idea of how huge and normalized One Piece is here.
Ooh, this is gonna be good, yeah.
When you walk into a stationery store or like a general goods store in the United States, there's the girls section that's full of pink and pastels, and there's the boys section full of angry black and red and blue and full of monster trucks and whatever series is popular right now, like Transformers or whatever. You walk into a stationery store in Japan, and there's a boys and a girls section. And the girls section is full of pink and pastels and usually Hello Kitty related things or like those cute mascots that are really popular amongst part of the fandom. You look at the boys side, and half of it is One Piece and half of it is Naruto.
Yes.
And this is every store, including the grocery store aisle where they have like the kids' products, the toy store where you're looking for things for kids in general. Every store, even the Konbini, usually has some kind of One Piece item.
It's huge. Awesome. It's absolutely, it's like the world's best-selling manga ever.
Is it too much to say that some manga writers, artists are actually truthfully household names over there?
Yes. I would say One Piece, as a teacher over here, if I say Luffy to a group of people in 4th grade, the reaction from the crowd is incredible. They love Luffy. I actually did an exercise where I let them choose to be different kinds of teams and I had different characters to represent the teams. And they had a choice between Luffy and Zoro. Let me tell you, I have never seen 10-year-old children fight over Luffy so hard.
Oh my god.
Oh man, that's great.
I'm so glad I can relate to 4th graders.
They really wanted him, and then they're like, okay, I guess we'll get Zoro for our team. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I really feel these 4th graders. Like, that's me. Yeah.
Also, a related tangent, now that we're talking about my student experiences, at one point I was teaching the equivalent, I think, of 6th or 7th grade, and the class started to ask me questions, practice questions in English in the second person, using the pronoun you.
Ooh.
So they asked me, oh, do you know what anime is? And I went, this is a dangerous question. So this led into me sort of pussyfooting around the subject a little bit. And then they asked, what anime do you know? And I see the stuff they carry around every day, and like 90% of them have something from Attack on Titan or Shingeki no Kyojin. So I told them, well, I like old anime. Generally, the things I like the best are older. And like Sayuki and Sorayas. And the teacher knew what I was talking about, kind of, but the students had no idea because they're freaking 10 years old. But then I said, oh, I also watch Attack on Titan. I have never seen a group of children so excited.
Ooh.
Their eyes grew like 3 times, and immediately the questions were coming out of them more excitedly than I've ever been able to evoke from them. Like, oh, what's your favorite part? Who's your favorite character? Do you know this one? Do you know that one? Have you watched this episode? Do you do this? And so they asked me, what characters do you like? And I know what they like because they carry things with the pictures, faces on them. So I basically went, well, I was drawing it out. Well, I like Mikasa. I wasn't saying anything untrue. And they're like, oh, and I'm like, oh, and I like Armin. Like, oh, and they're like chattering away at each other really excitedly about their opinion about my opinion. And then I went, I like Levi, and the room just erupted.
I hear he's a little bit popular. Just
a tiny bit. Just a tiny little bit.
It was my proudest moment, just watching them have a reaction to me on such a scale.
That's awesome.
The unfortunate part of this story is afterwards, the teacher, who is a huge One Piece fan, by the way, went and talked about, they wanted to know what is Attack on Titan. It's a fairly new series. They had no idea what it was about. And then, of course, they find on YouTube the worst possible scene from when Eren first, spoilers for the first 2 episodes, I guess, first erupts out of the other Titan as a Titan.
It's like the first thing they watch.
And that's the first thing they ever saw of Attack on Titan.
Oh, no.
And they looked at me and I'm like, please don't judge me.
So you like this? Okay.
Okay.
Basically, I had to backpedal really badly and go, I kind of like One Piece better. I really like One Piece better. I think it's more interesting, and so on and so forth.
You got some brownie points back with that.
There was and do you mind if I handle this question? I like this one. I like this one a lot.
Oh.
Okay. Seth from Facebook asked, you mentioned there were a few, you just earlier mentioned that there were a few rules to Comiket and stuff. And his question was, what is the percentage of licensed merchandise to unlicensed merchandise? But I guess since now we've found out that it's, this fan thing first, and there's, industry kind of separated from that. I was kind of wondering, like, for instance, Western conventions have rules for artists in the artist alley in terms of ratios of original work to fan art, I believe, for most conventions. And so I was wondering what some of those rules for Comiket were, and if there are such ratios involved, what series are okay to have doujinshi made of them, things like that.
Well, let's put it this way. The issues that cause America or USA conventions, America is bigger than just America, the USA conventions to input that law right now are different than the types of issues they have here. So the rules to counteract those issues take different forms.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of as a disclaimer, if anyone wants to go and look at how they do it, it's so much better. The problems are different.
Copyright law in Japan, whole different issue.
Yeah. What I would say there is no restriction percentage-wise of what you're displaying on your table as per your original content, your fan-made content. One way to view it is to understand how circles work here. usually one circle focuses on one series at a time as their primary output. So you'll have a circle that's purely about Tiger and Bunny right now. Maybe 5 years ago, they were purely a Kogia's circle, but they've changed. And you'll have a circle that only does original things and works on their original sort of IP, as it were. And they only, as representing themselves at Comiket, will primarily have those goods. Now, these circles do multiple things at once, but they'll have a primary focus, which affects where they're placed in Comiket and which day they're there, which is a thing I will probably explain, hopefully, because it's an interesting concept they do here. But that aside, so you have these circles that primarily focus on one genre, so you don't really have the mixture that you see at an AA table. Like, you'll go to, say, one AA table, and they'll have posters for sale from 5 or 10 different series at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
They don't do that in this particular venue here. You might have some side stuff from your other stuff that you do, but you primarily are focusing on one and you're not selling like 10 different series of them.
Oh, so it's just focus on one series. So are areas in Comiket organized based on series or just...
That's exactly correct.
Oh,
okay. Man.
So I should have explained this earlier when explaining Comiket, but we'll take a small diversion now for me to explain.
That's fine.
Comiket is so big that each day is separated into different genres on that day, and then different groups and are clustered together within the hallways to make them easier to find.
Wow. Okay.
So basically, let's take me for example. My favorite series right now is Tiger and Bunny, if you haven't guessed. I love it dearly. The fandom over here is gigantic. So the Tiger and Bunny Day was on Friday, the only day Tiger and Bunny dojin exhibitors would be there.
Okay.
And the Tiger and Bunny had its entire section to itself because it's that big.
Wow.
It had basically like there's 2 sides to a hall, but each hall itself is a giant hall that could be split into sub halls, or there's 3 like big sections of it. So they were 1/2 of 1/3 of that hall, or 1/6 of that hall to use math. A giant hall. So my big day for me was Friday in section, I don't quite remember. I think they were in hall 6, section A through F. That was the Tiger Bunny section. Or if your big deal was One Piece was in a different hall on a different day.
I'm sure that was an entire hall.
That was a big section of hall, if I recall. The JoJo section was on the Tiger and Bunny Day, and they were somewhere nearby the Tiger and Bunny section. Like, that's how it's organized. And then the halls themselves are organized into vague genres. So hopefully if you like one thing, the other things you like are going to be nearby. Because crossing from one end of the center to the other end of the center is a giant pain in the butt. The crowds, it's a huge place. It would just take time to walk there. The crowds are so big, they have to be very clever about how they direct traffic. And they're very specific about how traffic moves from one section of the center to another to prevent clogs in the hallways or any impeding of the flow of movement.
Do they have volunteer staff?
They go from one area to the other area. Sometimes you end up walking outside around the whole thing and back inside.
Do they have volunteer staff directing traffic, or like
the entirety of Comiket is volunteer?
Okay.
It's just like how Otakon is completely run by volunteers. So it's entirely volunteers directing traffic. The convention staff is also helping. It's very, like, if you know Otakon and how Otakon works, the convention has its own staff that helps, and they also hire on guards to help inflate their guard numbers so that they can keep track of these millions of people in one tiny space that might want to fight each other. And so you're walking through and you'll see like people wearing security guard uniforms, and I think some police people are assigned just to help make sure nothing happens, because we're in a big popular place with lots of people.
Okay.
And within the subsections of genres, so you'll have like the Tiger and Bunny section and the Shonen Jump section and the other things from Jump comics that aren't Shonen Jump section, etc.
Yeah.
You have subsections within those sections where they try to cluster together the different pairings or different subsections.
Oh, like ships and such.
So, yeah. So if you write non-shippy material, you'll be with other people with non-shippy material. If you write, taking Tiger and Bunny because it's the best example off the top of my head, people really like the two main characters together as a ship. So if you like
As a romantic pairing, yes.
certain dynamics, like if you like the one character Tiger and the other character Barnaby, if you like Tiger as like the more dominant personality, then all the people who write him that way are in one section.
Oh my god.
Wow, jeez. Does that involve a lot of like pre-screening, or guess, or like how does that truly get separated that efficiently?
Basically, from what I understand, which I don't understand well because I've never had to apply for Comiket and I don't know anyone who has.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
What I understand it is when you apply to be an exhibitor at Comiket, part of what you're writing down is what you do.
Okay.
And just how in the States we have specific code names for specific pairings, or like we explicitly on a fan fiction, they'll say, I write dominant Barnaby with not dominant Tiger. Oh,
Imagine putting that on like a job application or something.
Yeah, they write that down on the application to Comiket. So when Comiket like gathers together all the applications, they eventually and like do the lottery to see who actually gets an exhibition space. They can see and read like, oh, this is a Barnaby Tiger one, not a Tiger Barnaby. So we'll try to put them next to each other, and these are kind of the same, so we'll put them here. Because the application for Comiket is like half a year in advance.
Wow.
So they have time to figure out who goes where. It's not a perfect system.
All right.
Yeah.
And they also, what they try to do, and I don't know how they figure this out, to be honest, they try to put the most popular doujinshi circles on the sides of the home because you have more room to have big lines.
That makes sense.
Like, everyone complained about LineCon this year at Otakon, right? You haven't been at a LineCon until you've been at Comiket.
Our lines pale in comparison.
Let me put it this way. In the industry section, part of what's going on is the industry booths are promoting their new material, but they also sell things that they only sell at Comiket.
Oh, okay. Exclusives.
They'll never be sold anywhere else.
Right.
If you're a very, very popular company like Type Moon, your line is not even in the dealer's room. It starts outside the dealer's room. It wraps around the second floor where the dealer's room is. It goes down 3 flights of stairs. It takes a hang to the left and goes sneaking along a different section of the hall. It goes down the first ground floor, goes around the corner again. And it is filled with hundreds of people waiting to get to Type Moon in shifts, basically, because the dealer's room is so crowded itself, there's nowhere to put a line if there's an extreme line.
Welcome to the ninth circle of line hell.
No,
basically.
It sounds like it.
And even to get into what we would consider the industry dealer's room, you have to go outside, go around the entirety of one section of one of the cosplay areas, go up 3 flights of stairs, go around a building 3 times. So this is why in like Lucky Star there's a whole section about you have to plan what you do at Comiket, just because it's hard to get to places, and some people, if they're popular, sell out immediately or have exclusive goods. Even the doujinshi artists will do this, sell exclusive goods just at Comiket. If you really want it, you're lined up outside from 8 a.m. until the doors open at 10.
I can't even imagine. I don't even like anything that much to wait that long.
I don't either, so I did not.
I guess we would be remiss to not ask if what you got at Comiket. Because, I mean, hey, Did you
This
get
is
anything?
true.
at
What'd you
Comiket?
get?
Yeah, come on.
Well,
Did you get us
first,
gifts?
I'd like to mention something I did not mention in answering the listener's question.
Mm-hmm.
He said, what is the percentage of original to fandom work? And I'd mentioned how individually people usually cosplay one series, it's all fandom work. There's two things I want to add to that to help give you perspective. The third day of Comiket this year was almost entirely devoted to circles with original work only.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah.
The original Comiket, and for many years after that, until about the 80s, the bigger percentage of goods offered at Comiket were original works.
Okay.
This changed with the anime boom in the 80s, especially with series like Ronin Warriors. I was really pleased when I read that. And apparently, like Captain Harlock or a similar series was so big, it was this huge influence on the event. So, not to say that, oh, this is a paradise, they don't make you do original work, blah, blah, blah. A lot of people do original work anyway, and they're really great. And on the third day, you'll see people who are in the industry selling their own doujinshi as on the amateur level as opposed to their official work with their company.
Interesting. Okay. To expand upon this question a little more, I think the original question was the percentage of licensed merchandise to unlicensed merchandise. And I know, yeah, there's huge copyright issues and such like that. This reminded me that the dealer's room there, you said there's a small dealer's room that's outside of all the fan artists and such putting out their work based on different series and such. Is the dealer's room divided in a similar way where it has like a section for each series based on which day it is? Or is it just the same shit every day of Comiket?
It's the same booth every day, and it's based on the company.
Okay.
So, for example, Kodansha, who is a big publisher over here, and is probably a familiar name to many listeners, has a booth. Pixu has a booth. Honda Civic had a booth for some reason.
Honda Civic, my favorite anime.
All right.
I think they were doing something promotional. Actually, AU, who's a phone company I use, had a booth promoting Yoapeta.
Oh, good.
Or Yoapeta.
Oh,
And
right,
that booth,
sure.
the trick was, like, AU's like their big sponsor. And AU had an exercise bike set up hooked up to a generator.
Oh my
So
god.
if you wanted a special edition set of playing cards featuring the bike anime protagonist, you had to ride a bike to charge someone's phone.
that's amazing.
Oh, that's really good.
I'm in total.
that's a really good
I'm in
question.
bike anime hell, so I would have totally done that.
I looked at it and the line was long, and I was also suffering a little bit of heat exhaustion, so I decided it was a bad idea.
Fair enough.
But the dealer, what you could air quotes the dealer's room, or really the industry booths, are actual physical representations of the companies, and they're promoting their wares and selling special goods. The company behind Dramatical Murder was there selling their
Great,
and promoing the new stuff.
my favorite.
I know you love it so much.
Thanks. Yeah, I
Yes.
really. Oba. Oba.
My favorite moment in that game is that dog.
Stupid dog. You make me look bad. Let me. So the percentage of the dealer's room though, compared to everything else, like that, all those industry booths is still like 25%, or is it like?
I would say the size of that dealer's room is equivalent to like maybe a third to a fourth of the total space.
Okay.
But the dealer's room doesn't change, and all the other ones do. So if you like do out the math of like how many people actually use the presentation space that are fan works created authors, and then like you work out the math, they're like it's a very small percentage of total people who are exhibiting.
Okay. So yeah, definitely different feel than like USA conventions.
And there are very strict censorship restrictions on the doujinshi show.
Ooh.
Like, if this is going to be a weird thing to say, if you've ever read some smut from doujinshi,
Oh well, you know
you
me.
might have noticed there are weird bars and whited out areas of the pages.
Oh yes.
Yeah, the censorship,
Those
not quite
specifics
censorship sort
are
of thing.
given by the event, because there's the way I understand it, which may or may not be correct, is there's sort of an implied we'll look this way if you look that way relationship with the industry. So as long as they don't do something extremely gross, then the industry kind of tacitly agrees to ignore them.
Interesting.
And part of it is there's like this whole censorship thing, and there's pamphlets upon pamphlets given to exhibitors about exactly how you're supposed to censor things or what is or is not allowed. And cosplayers have very specific guidelines on what percentage of their body can be showing at any given time.
How thick the black bar needs to be.
Because of anti-profanity laws in the area of Tokyo they're in.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So, like, a lot of people have this image of Japan as this wonderland, a sexual experimentation, and open acceptance of kinks. No.
Not at all.
They have extremely strict profanity laws that can be very different depending on where you are in Japan.
Well,
And if you don't follow them, you can get in a lot of trouble.
That's a great segue into kind of, we want to ask you about kind of your perceptions before you went to Japan and kind of the reality of the situation. And I don't know if you're under the school of thought of, Japan's this liberated sexual, like they do whatever, tentacles everywhere, whatever. And then you got there and you're like,
sort of like preconceptions and then the broken pieces of them after.
Yeah. So what was the big things that came up to you when you first went to Japan and living through there now? What was different from what you initially expected?
I'm sort of a bad sample size because before I went to Japan, I was also studying like things like international relations and culture. So I was disabused of any potential notions I might have had long before I got
right, because it was your college focus.
Because my advisor is a beautiful person. But like, for instance, I have been gone through essentially a lot of really good sensitivity training.
Oh, good.
But one thing that really startled me, and this is a really small thing, is I walked out one day and I looked across the street, and anime protagonist hair, where it's like really fluffed up and like sticking out everywhere, and you don't see it as much in character designs anymore, but there's a period of time where every single protagonist had hair that was like super fluffy and going every direction.
Yeah.
That's a real hairstyle.
Based on reality.
It's a real thing, and you'll see, like, at the time I was here last, which was like 2007, so fashions have dramatically changed. I haven't really seen it again in my second time here. But when I was here in 2007, during an era of anime where you saw that a lot, it was an actual style of hair worn by like really super trendy guys, especially if they were like hosts at clubs, like guys who really wanted to look like really cool and really good.
So they'd like style their hair like Goku or something, just to like.
Well, their hair would be usually bleached, and when a person whose background is extensively Japanese tries to bleach their hair, the nature of their hair color tends to turn vaguely orangey.
Oh.
So, for instance, Ichigo in Bleach, which started when I was in college, so that says how old it and I am. There's a big deal made at one point about how they're like, dude, why do you bleach your hair? Because he's like this weird kind of orangey color, but it's his natural hair color. He just happens to have that kind of hair. That oranginess is what happens when like a punk school kid tries to bleach their hair to be cool.
All right.
Is that why it's called bleach?
That's
yeah.
Wow.
Oh. Wow.
Man, we're just learning all over the place here.
Ichigo with his like crazy hair, and he's always been, in the beginning at least, when they were focusing on like vaguely normal plot lines, he would get occasionally just sort of chewed out about his hair. He'd be like, dude, that's just my hair, lay off. It's because it's associated with people who are really gangster and kind of cause trouble.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay.
Or who are really cool, but like it was non-standard for school. Like you're not allowed to do that if you're in a school. And then some kids do it anyway, but that happens in every place and every time period.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like that was a real hairstyle, and I went, why is that in real life? But like people may have this image from anime and manga that like Japan is super accepting of people who really love and are passionate about anime and manga. No, they're still nerds.
Right.
The general population is not into anime and manga. It's just a type of entertainment that's extremely popular and is widely distributed, especially that which is aimed at children. Especially anime, especially the ones aimed at adults, outside of the subculture, isn't really on anyone's radar. If I walked up to someone and even said like a fairly popular series that wasn't Naruto, Bleach, or One Piece, there's a high likelihood they'll have no clue what I'm talking about.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. So you can't. A lot of people, for various reasons, like to project on Japan some sort of Fantasyland paradise image. Partly because people from a European background or a Western mindset has been doing this to Japan in various themes for an extremely long time. And thematically, anime and manga fandom will often pick up something that's extremely old in terms of doing stuff that's actually kind of dumb, and will kind of translate that vision of Japan as an other strange, foreign, cool place into what they understand, which is like, oh, an anime and manga is everywhere, and if I go there, my specific interest will be supported exclusively, and I'll be happy. It's a country filled with a various amount of different people who do different things, just like anywhere else, and in many ways, Japan is an extremely conservative country, depending on what kind of scale you want to. So I watched, and I watch even as an ALT, other individuals who came over with that sort of stars in their eyes mindset, and they can't quite either handle the reality when they're here, when they're treated as even stranger than perhaps normal, because this is also a foreigner now doing it.
Right.
Or there's just, they stand out in a way that isn't very complimentary.
Oof.
Which is the opposite of what they want.
Well, it's a form of, it's definitely not an extreme one, but it's a form of Orientalism, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
To
absolutely.
see that as different, yeah.
Oh my,
absolutely.
Ian, you are now my favorite person.
What?
Let me put it this way. At AUSA 2013, I did an entire panel, which was more well received than I ever anticipated. And the title of the panel was From Weeaboo to Orientalism, A Short History of Japanophilia.
Ooh, man.
And
Lindsey, I might just have to marry you.
oh,
What?
well, actually, and I did a repeat of my panel on live stream for a bunch of friends who weren't able to see me in person. So it's actually recorded on live stream. On live stream, I also use the same handle I use for everything on the internet. That would be the Gryfeathr name, the Gryfeathr.
Gryfeathr missing certain vowels, yes.
Yeah, Gryfeathr missing certain vowels. And I have a recording, I think it's in 2 parts because there was an issue in the middle, of me talking about this. And I'm really hopeful that when I get back to the States, at some point, I'll be able to repeat that panel, hopefully multiple times, because I feel like it's important to let people be aware of how horrible they're being.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. I think
And I
it's
say
the
that
right...
with like tongue in cheek a little bit, but at the same time, I'm almost not joking. But like, don't take, whoever's listening, don't take it too hard right now. But if you're interested in it, I love talking about it and addressing
It's the right time
to.
It's a good time to be talking about this sort of stuff too. I mean, we are starting to become just that little bit more aware, just that little bit more understanding that we're sharing cultures and not just taking it, not just rejecting it. Yeah.
Oh, Ian, you're making me so happy right now.
Oh, yay. Well, we can definitely link that live stream in the episode.
Yeah.
I would definitely think that would be something that people that listen to the podcast would be interested in.
Hopefully. Sure. But I believe we've stripped it away from the point of the question that we were addressing, where like things I didn't expect and then I found out later were like, oh, well, that's true or not true. Well, also, a lot of the small things you see in anime about how school life is conducted it is really based on school life. I mean, we're not having children walking around and turning strange colors and yelling at each other. But for instance, there's a really big surge in popularity right now in sports anime genres, like Yomamushi Pedal or the volleyball anime whose name I can't remember,
Haikyuu, I think.
or Haikyuu,
Yes.
and like baseball anime.
Ace of
And in
Diamond,
it, you
or
see the kids, their lives are revolving around sports and the people in their club, and you're like, why are these kids? I mean, partly it's plot related because it's always talking about the sport, so you're always seeing things with them and the other kids. But in particular, the anime O-Footy, which is about baseball, what you see in terms of their lives revolving around the sports and it being the primary thing in their lives is very much similar to how it actually is, especially for, say, a middle school student over here.
oh,
Your primary social group in Japan as a student is your after school club, and you're required. You are and you aren't, but you're mostly required to be in at least one.
which is why a lot of the plots revolve
And
around
for
that.
instance, exactly. Like in the bicycle anime, the protagonist has to choose a club to be part of. And part of the beginning is him flailing over, what am I going to do? I want to do this, but do I want to do bicycles? And so
He wants to join the anime club, and there's not enough people for it, so they don't have an anime club. So he joins the bike club. It's
for
great.
various reasons. But
I love
the
it.
themes in the bicycle anime where he finds acceptance at the club and he finds drive and excitement by being part of this social group, you'll notice that protagonist is always talking about how important friends are to him and how he doesn't have any and how much he really wants to have them. And he's mostly driven in the plot, not because he wants to be good at biking or better than anyone else, but because he just wants to be with his friends really badly.
Yeah.
That reflects this sort of traditional idea of how sports clubs are supposed to be working.
Okay.
That's the goal. It's to teach them how to be social entities with other people and to work in society as a social person.
Right. So it is just another extracurricular, but still, a schooling socialism. It's like not
Socialization, a little different.
Oh God. Sorry, Obama changed.
Oh no.
But yeah,
so
a lot of, like, for instance, it is true that after school, students are at school for an extra 2 hours for practice.
Okay.
On weekends, they go in the morning specifically for practice.
Well, I feel like this is definitely like promising in that we should definitely have you back for an episode if we talk about just anime cliches, tropes, trends, and stuff like that. Stuff that we see all the time. Because I feel like this is
get that perspective again. Yeah, we'd love to just figure out how all the different pieces fit together with the series that are popular, the trends that can continue recurring. So, and talking about this, I'm really surprised now when I think about it that more sports manga and anime doesn't have the same popularity in the West right now. You'd think that, like, well, USA specifically, because there's such a sports focus in a lot of our media and our culture, you'd think that this kind of series would relate and be easily adaptable and pick up. But when I think about it, I think most people who know about what anime manga are not ones who are necessarily interested in sports a lot of times. But there is an intersect, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, the intersect in Japan is much more likely to be higher. And
yes.
Let's put it this way. One of the halls on one of the days, we walked into it, and you know how big the halls are from I've been describing them. It was a sea of sports.
The hall of sports.
It was a sea of jerseys in black, orange, and garish colors as far as the eye could see.
That's crazy.
And there were tons of Haikyuu cosplayers and also bicycle cosplayers. So,
what, they cosplay the bicycle?
Yes.
What some people do is they wear the tracksuit, which is sold here. So that is an aside, a difference in cosplay. If you're a lower level or you're a cosplayer who doesn't really necessarily is good at sewing, it's much easier to find things to buy here.
You just buy a
To wear.
tracksuit, or jersey, whatever.
Yeah, so you can buy the pedal tracksuit.
I'm actually very tempted to buy one myself.
Yeah, I think because it's so hard to make that outfit without the specialized equipment. But some people have like a set of handlebars, just like floating handlebars.
God, that's really good.
And they walk around with it. And AU actually, there's like a set of employees who really love Yowamushi pedals. So the entire convention, they were dressed up for it. And they had those pedals, and they like walk around with the floating handlebars. It was really adorable, and they've like made like a fake version of the opening.
That's great! Oh wow!
And like all of the shots of them on bicycles is them running with these bike handles.
I need to watch that. If it's online now, I need to see that.
Yeah,
it's really exciting. If you Google AU as in the letters AU and then like Yowamushi pedal or something like that, you'll get the thing, and you don't even have to need subtitles to appreciate what's going on.
That's perfect.
Pretty sure a screen cap of that will be for this.
Yeah,
episode.
I'll find it. Find it.
The featured image for this episode. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay, well, transitioning from that, which is Western perceptions of the Japanese, of Japan. Between that and our third topic, I wanted to let's get into a little middle ground, which is how, like, just tips in surviving in Japan, just Westerners in Japan. How do you feel like you fit into life there? What do you do? How do you fit into everyday culture, sort of thing?
Well, when I talk about this, I have to make it very clear who I am when someone looks at me. I am a young white woman who speaks English natively. That changes a lot of things for me. If I was a man, I'd be the most privileged foreigner group in Japan.
Really?
As much as the power structures in the USA, just to devolve a little bit, is very complicated regards to someone who is a white person versus someone who is designated as not. That is so exported all over, and there's a lot of history to explain it, and that's a whole episode in itself to get into it. But if we just can take for a moment the assumption that there are some power structures that exist and influence many other cultures. When a white person walks into a room, the reaction is very different than what someone else does. I say this under this topic because if you happen to be a person who has the appearance or at least the impression of a white English speaker or a white person in general, you are going to be reacted to very differently than maybe some other people will be. And you must be aware of this to avoid being a giant jerk. And it's just, I'm talking somewhat harshly, but I don't really mean to be. So the allegory to that is if you're a foreigner in Japan, especially someone who looks dramatically different from the average appearance of the population around you, you are going to get attention, whether you like it or not. And sometimes people are going, when they look at you, oh God, I hope she doesn't ask me a question, because I took English in high school, but that was 20 years ago, and I don't remember anything belong. Hello, how are you?
Right.
To people who are used to expecting the kind of personality that's like, I need everything to cater to me, and they're expecting trouble because it just happens frequently. Or they might be some sort of intersection of discrimination against certain groups of people that make them think differently about you. But there's no way for me to walk down a street and not stand out in some way to the people around me. So keep in mind, people are looking at you, which means they're extra aware of what you're doing, including if you do something really dumb.
Oh, embarrassing.
And most of the time, or embarrassing, but also they're looking at you, and if you're in an area where not many people who look like you live, you might be the only example of a real life blank person they have ever seen.
Wow.
So your actions are going to reflect on every single other person that looks like you. And I have to explain this because I'm a white person. And people who are not white people are currently rolling the eyes. Oh God, we already know this. But it's the people who are used to being in a privileged position who aren't going to be aware that this is what's going on. So when you get here, you get surprised. The you being specifically angled at people who don't have to deal with this most of their lives, which makes them very lucky.
It turns out white privilege doesn't carry everywhere. Wow. Like, oh my God.
And yet it does at the same time.
Oh.
Because white people are more likely to be hired for an English teaching position.
Huh.
Yeah.
Because we're the traditional view of an English speaker as far as the media goes.
Now, do you notice that other races get kind of the same? Like, do you find that it's just anyone who's an outsider gets the kind of extra awareness about them, or it's just
Absolutely.
White people in particular are just like this?
Well, if you think white people get looked at, imagine a black person.
Yeah.
A good story told to me by one of the ALTs I know who is a black individual. He'll walk down the street and adults are trying to be polite, so they're trying not to focus on you, but children in particular will look at him and then take a double take and then a triple take and then look up at their parents like, betray, like, why didn't you tell me this exists?
That's crazy.
So, like, in many ways, and let's put it this way, a black person's used to that much more than a white person is because they have to deal with it all the time, especially if you're from the States.
Yeah.
And as a white person, I'm very privileged to be surprised.
Okay.
But that's a little bit of a very serious tangent on the more general sense of the message. Basically, this is what I was told as a student getting ready to come over to Japan.
Okay.
Don't be a bad gaijin. Which basically means there's no way to get around the fact that you're a foreigner who does not have what's called cultural capital to understand everything going around you and to know exactly what you're supposed to do at every social cue.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't grow up in Japan. You haven't had a Japanese mother telling you every day to tuck in your shirt this certain way or to talk to people in a certain way. Or you don't know what the expectations are of an adult in this society all that well. You're going to make really dumb mistakes because you just don't know. And that ignorance is okay. People are extremely forgiving.
Okay. But expectations are high.
But you are constantly on a stage, and you want to try to at least perform in the nicest way you possibly can, and to try to use your normal rules of being considerate with other people.
Okay.
If you truly mean well and you're thinking about the people around me, you're generally going to be okay. But like there are some small cultural rules that are really handy to know ahead of time. Like for instance, talking on the phone is extremely rude, even in a public area. So if you get a phone call, please step outside and into another area, or there's some special areas set aside just for phone calls. Most people keep their phone on silent, like all the time.
Oh.
Especially on the train. Do not play loud music on the train. Do not be loud on the phone on the train. Everyone's going to look at you no matter what you look like.
Someone should tell the New York.
Yeah, it's like the reaction to it, the consideration of how rude it is higher. Or don't walk and eat at the same time unless you're at a very specific instance where you see everyone else doing it.
Huh.
Because walking and eating is also considered kind of rude.
Okay.
Or when you approach escalators or elevators, generally in the Tokyo area, you want to bear to the left if you're not walking up them.
Okay.
Osaka, for some reason, is reversed.
Oh.
Oh, interesting.
I've seen someone postulate it's because it's such an international, like, business-driven city, so there's a lot of people from other countries where the rules of the road are also reversed, that they've also adopted it, but there's probably a million different reasons for
That's
it.
super confusing then. You just go to Osaka, you think everything's normal, pull to Tokyo.
What you need to do. Yeah. So you go to Osaka, and my instinct is like to go to the left, and then everyone's on the right, and I'm like, gosh darn it, I just learned this. But generally, the rule is observe people around you and what they are doing, and do it too. If you see everyone using a certain kind of way to use the ticket style, and like a certain attitude about how they use the ticket style, try to do the same thing.
Golden rules fit in.
Notice that, yeah, not because we want to erase who you are, but because you're a guest in a country using cultural rules that you may or may not have been taught. And the way to present yourself the way you want to be is that you have to know what the cultural rules are. Like, if you want to be spectacularly rude in the USA, and you're from the USA, you know what behavior signals spectacular rudeness. And you can choose, some of us can choose to do this on purpose or not. But you don't know what that is in Japan necessarily.
That makes sense.
So it's like, try to be as friendly as possible. Understand that rules and cultural expectations are going to be different. So don't be offended when something works in a way you don't expect them to be, because it's the way it works for everyone else too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, we were going to cover more so in their third topic, Japanese perceptions of us, but I think you actually covered the topic a bit, talking about how our foreigners are kind of on a stage, and all eyes are on someone who's seen as an outsider. And I don't think that's ill will or anything, just not familiar with, other people coming into the country. So what I did actually want to mention was that I'm kind of curious what you've noticed about perceptions of American fans of, if maybe at Comiket you noticed that if there's any mention of Western appeal or anything like that. Because this actually reminds me, at Otakon, I may have mentioned this on our Otakon recap episode, but I did an obscure JoJo's Bizarre Adventure character cosplay and took a picture, put it on Twitter, and someone I know on Twitter actually has a bunch of Japanese followers because they do a bunch of JoJo stuff, and they retweeted the picture, and I found a bunch of Japanese fans started like retweeting and favoriting it too and commenting it. And what do they call? I think they called us, it was like, ooh, so cute, Mr. Overseas. Like,
oh my gosh! I would be dying to look at those tweets. Oh my goodness.
I had to like Google Translate and figure it out. Yeah, it was like, it was really funny. And I'm just curious, like, do they find like what we're doing, like, do they find us really obnoxious when we're talking about certain parts of the fans? Like, I really want to know, like, how we're kind of viewed, if that was just an anomaly or they're really excited.
I guess, yeah, just you've mentioned the slight othering that happens when Americans go over to Japan. But yeah, what are their perceptions of just us still over here in the United States? And just, I guess that, yeah, our version of anime manga culture, and I guess just the US in general,
yeah.
I wonder.
Well, I can only talk so far because I'm not a Japanese person.
Right.
And I've never had I so far haven't had the chance to really sit down with someone in the fandom and go like, so, about those foreigners who also like this stuff, what do you think about it? Like, I don't have that touchstone. All I have are my observations and personal experiences. So, speaking from those as the closest thing to that as we have at this moment, let me put it this way. A lot of people at Comiket saw me walking around, and I'm not the only foreigner there, but a lot of foreigners there may or may not have a high level of Japanese. So occasionally I tend to kind of stay back, and I don't like forcing anyone into an interaction they don't want to have. They can choose whether or not they want to deal with the white lady. You may or may not understand what you're saying.
Right.
So, and also I'm working in a secondary language that I'm not fluent in, so I'm a little shy as well. But I had this beautiful experience where I stepped up to a section of a previous event I went to. So there's another event called Super Comic City, which is like Comiket but smaller. And as we've mentioned a few times, Ronin Warriors was my first anime. I was looking through the catalog and I noticed, oh my god, Ronin Warriors was made in the 80s. And there is a section of this event dedicated to Ronin Warriors. Oh my god.
Holy crap.
And I stared in dumb disbelief for about a good 5 minutes until rushing my butt over to that section of the hall because this was just too good. And there was like this tiny section, and it was all Ronin Warriors, Japanese Ronin Warriors fans who are all about my age because that's what it came out, was about in the 80s. And I was born at the end of the 80s, but we saw it in the 90s. So I was just sort of overwhelmed emotionally a little bit because I was there by myself, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this old series that very few people really are in the fandom anymore over in the USA, and there's still a few people left. So I gathered up the courage as I was walking along, and two of the ladies seemed particularly friendly, and they had dojin based on two characters I dearly love. So I managed to gather my courage to say to them in Japanese, I'm so surprised to see Samurai Troopers, Japanese name. It's been so long. And they looked at me and they're like, oh my gosh, the white lady speaks Japanese. And they're like, you know what this is? And I'm like, yeah, I know what it is. When I was a kid, I loved this show. And there was just this beautiful outpouring between us where they're like, you know what Ronin Warriors is. Where are you from? You're from the USA? People in the USA know what Ronin Warriors is? We kind of heard that it was translated, but we didn't know. And there was this beautiful moment of two groups of people who love this old series and still love it. And at the end of the story of us, like, basically geeking out horrendously together, they're like, we have to take a picture of you. So they took a picture of themselves with me. And then the one person who like writes most of their work that they're giving out, and they had like a whole bunch of stuff on their table. She's like talking to her friend. She's like, I think we really should give her something, and because I was kind of out of money at that point, and I was like, because I could only buy one thing, so I was like, they could see me decide. She's like, no, we'll just give it to you. And then she paused and went, no, we're just gonna give you one of everything. One of every book on the table, and like she is one of the most. They have no idea how much they made my day, because I was feeling a little lonely at that point in time. And they shoved my arm full of all these beautiful things, because we all love, like, they'd ask, who's your favorite character? And I'm like, well, my favorite character is blah, blah, blah. And they're like, he's our favorite too! And they're like, wait, is reading Japanese okay? Because most of their stuff is just basically fan fiction. I'm like, I absolutely can read Japanese. So they shoved my arms full of these things. And the one girl was like, yes, we're giving her one of everything. And the other one's like, is that okay? Should we really give her one of everything? Because they're trying to sell them.
Sure.
And the other girl was like, no, this is international relations. This is important.
Oh, that's really wonderful.
That actually answers the question pretty well, I think.
So, I mean, that's one group of people's experience towards a foreigner who likes something that's rare to like.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I
Like interests will
that
translate,
there are plenty of people, such as some of the larger artists on Pixiv, who have been dogged for so long by foreign enthusiasts who don't pay attention to their rules. We're really tired of it.
Yeah.
There are some Pixiv artists who were so popular but their art keeps being reposted in a way that they don't want it to be. They've tried changing their circle name. They've tried changing their web address. The foreign fans are so passionate about them, they keep finding them. But then they keep not paying attention to what she would prefer them to do with her artwork. Because a hobby like this one isn't exactly completely socially acceptable in every situation.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, so especially if you draw explicit material.
And then American or international fans start sharing the art everywhere, and people find it that they don't want to find it. Okay. Yeah, for listener comprehension, Pixiv is a site kind of like I would say like DeviantArt. or just an art hosting site where a lot of just original artists in Japan host their work, but you need an account to be able to see the images. And what happens a lot of times is that international fans like to just right click, save image as, repost on whatever site like Tumblr or whatever, and be like, hey, look at what art I did. Or they'll just post it without a source or whatever. And this has been pissing off Japanese creators for a very long time now. Probably like the last 10 years. They're just like, stop reposting our art. So
Basically.
to give some background on that. So yeah, if you find really cool art on Pixiv or any site that seems to be in a different language and they have a whole bunch of text that you don't feel like hitting Google Translate on, just link to it. Don't repost it. For the love of God, don't repost. Like, source every artist, reblog it if you can. I don't know what you got to do. Just don't steal art. Don't.
And a lot of it too is there is that context that fans might not be aware of, because in the USA fandom, I feel a lot of artists do try to keep their identity separate. Like, there's a reason I work under a handle instead of my full name with my cosplay photography.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure how much I want to link that to my last name, etc.
Sure.
But in Japan, the idea of separating your personal life from your public life is a much stronger and cultural impetus to do so. And especially works like the fan stuff, people do that in a very private manner. Comiket is one of the biggest events in Japan. It draws thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, but that's not the entirety of the population of Japan. And fan events like this are some of the spaces where it's considered okay to be expressing that. There's a specific place set aside for it. That's why cosplayers can't cosplay outside of the venue.
Oh, yeah. That puts it all in perspective.
It very much becomes a contained space sort of thing.
It's a very contained space with very specific rules, and that is how they mediate the public spaces which are near them and this sort of alternative public space. I will go out on a limb and say, in general, in my specific experience, subculture has designated spaces in which they are performed. For instance, to give a broader example, if you are Lolita and you want to wear Lolita in public, you do a very similar thing to a cosplayer. You go to a certain area, such as Harajuku or Yoyogi Park. You change there. Then you go out. Walk around, do whatever event you have, etc. Like, I'm talking like people who are truly part of the subject, like deep Lolita. And then you come back, change, and go home.
You don't walk there in the outfit, for the love of God. Don't do that.
Part of it, too, is that you're likely taking public transportation with very limited space. So, like, especially with costumes and things, part of what's going on here is pure logistics. There are so many people trying to use the same train, there is no room for them.
That makes sense.
Whereas at Otakon, you change in your room and you walk to the convention center and everything's hunky-dory.
Right.
Or you come in a car or something. But even at Otakon, some people go to the convention and change and then walk out. But there's a stronger sort of unspoken rule about it.
Okay.
Like, this is how it's negotiated.
Kind of a stigma.
You put it on and then you take it off.
Yeah, spaces exist to foster these things, and otherwise they are basically walled off sort of thing. Is there like kind of just that fourth wall feeling?
A little bit. In my brief experience and my observation.
Okay.
Because there's this idea, like in any society, this isn't unique to Japan, that like you have a social persona and there's certain ways that you act in social situations in public spaces, whether or not people pay attention to it. And it's just the way it's negotiated and it plays out is influenced by history and local culture and things like that. So that's generally how people negotiate it here. And of course, this is talking in a general sense. This is not every person, and different subcultures express themselves in different ways. as a disclaimer.
Yeah, a lot of generalizations, a lot of anecdotes this episode, but otherwise, I think this is a really valuable perspective to have, and I think Ian and I and all of our listeners really appreciate you coming onto the show to deliver this to us, and hopefully you'll have some pictures to share from Comiket as well.
Oh, I do. I made sure to take some pictures to give you a sense of the scale of the crowd and as well as the venue.
Perfect.
It's
Wonderful.
hard to take pictures because of the aforementioned restriction on where you're allowed to take pictures, because you're only allowed to really take pictures in the cosplay area.
Right.
So if you take, even if you're just taking pictures of the crowd here, it was a little not okay. So I was doing my best to follow all the rules and be inconspicuous as possible as a white person can in this particular situation. But also because I'm a white person, people aren't inclined to deal with me if I'm bending a rule. And some people take too much advantage of that. And I try not to as much as I can. So I got some shots of sort of the crowd, and if you'll notice in my pictures, I've done my best to either blur out or arrange things so you can't really see the faces of people, because privacy laws here are extremely strong.
Oh, wow.
And I don't want, and also it's my personal photography belief that if someone did not volunteer to be in your picture and you have a very clear picture of them, then that's not okay. Like if someone's like the focus of your picture, it should be someone you asked permission from or who volunteered or was addressed afterwards. Like cosplayers are there to have their pictures taken and they understand that. But a random attendee may not want their face on the internet.
I wish the rest of the world believed that and would like filter their pictures. I wish they would just be like, oh, I just saw this random guy in the back of my photo. Guess I'm never sharing that. You know, I'm going to blur that out. Just not a thing here.
You'll see it in selfies sometimes on Instagram, how they'll post pictures of them with their friends, but everyone's face is covered.
That makes sense.
So it comes out of that too, like that sense of privacy and like separating personal life and public life.
Okay, well, we'll make sure to share your photos, Comiket, and also a link to your cosplay photography, because I think it'd be great to share. You are a fantastic photographer. I've done a few shoots with her myself.
Yay!
And make sure for listeners who are just now finding this to check out the Mouthful of Toast website, mouthfultoast.com. Check out the Mouthful of Toast Facebook, the Twitter, at Mouthful Toast. And check us out everywhere. This is just a bonus episode. We have our main episode this week, or last week, whenever this comes out.
Last week, whenever.
And we'll figure out release stuff. Basically, we're trying to do a bunch more bonus episodes like this where we have guests come on and talk about what you want, and special topics and conventions we go to. So let us know what you want to hear about. And if you have any more questions for Lindsey, hopefully we'll have her as a Japan correspondent for a lot of the site, which would be really great to have.
I would be more than happy to go running around or answer any questions that I'm capable of answering for your listeners. If they want, I know you guys will be linking to me, so just to put it here, if anyone has any further questions about anything I've said on the podcast, if you'd like to disagree with me, if you'd like to tell me where I'm wrong, especially, please feel free to go to my Tumblr that will be linked and send me an ask. I love talking about all of the things we were discussing today. You can also find me talking about similar things on YouTube for the Persona 4 Mythology and Psychology of Persona 4 panel. If you Google that, you'll get right to it. I had a chance to do that with Alyssa and Vicky talking about things in Persona 4 in a similar manner as to here. I have things I've talked about on live stream about Orientalism and connecting it to weeaboo culture. And I would love to talk more about these subjects, especially if there's interest. So if your listeners are interested in asking me anything, seeing what I'm doing, or letting me know they want to hear more from me as well, either here on the podcast or outside of the podcast, please drop me a line. I love talking to people, and I'm stuck in Japan right now.
Yeah, please just let us know what you guys want to hear. Stick with us. We got a lot more content coming. And thanks for listening so much.